Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this 27th edition of Prague Rhythm 2025 on behalf of my co-director, Professor Peter Neužil and Vivek Reddy and teams from Homolka and IKEM Hospital. As you will see, we prepared a very extensive program for you. And as it has been a tradition to start this meeting with music, I would like to invite two performers, pianist Lukáš Klánský and violinist Terezie Hledíková, and they will perform two pieces of music for this opening ceremony.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me explain why we are not using this beautiful piano and instead we are using this modern one. It's only because this one is a really nice historical piece of instrument, but it's already untunable because its pianos are more like cars. It gets older and older. Violin, older the better, but the piano it's same as with car. So old piano is maybe a little bit dangerous for your ears. Let me say you what we will play. First piece will be from Bedřich Smetana, famous Czech composer. I'm sure you know his piece for symphonical orchestra. It's symphonical poems from my homeland. And this piece is like Smetana's chamber version of his ideas about national themes and inspirations from Czech country. So the first piece will be quite romantic. It was written in 1880. And the second piece will be very different. It's only 44 years later, in 1924, and it's written by Maurice Ravel, who has been really the type of composer who was always searching for new ways. And the piece is called Gypsy, and it works with traditional themes from gypsy music and also Hungarian music. It starts with very long cadenza for solo violin, so please don't think that I forgot to play. It's really intentional that the beginning is long cadenza in violin. And the theme is really fast and energical, so I think it will make your morning much more fresh. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
Lukáš Plánský a Terezie Hledíková. Okay, so since many other people arrived later, so welcome again to this 27th edition of Prague Rhythm 2025. I would like also to thank to our sponsors. You have all names and logos of sponsors on these panels, besides the main panel. Without their help, it would not be possible to organize this meeting with so many live cases. So thanks again to all sponsors and welcome to this meeting. And I don't need to repeat probably this original mission, which we started many years ago to educate Czech physicians primarily, but from second edition it was more international meeting than a meeting for Czech physicians. And since 2008, we work together with my colleague here, Peter Neužil, my colleague and friend, and we joined the efforts. And we are able to run simultaneously cases from both hospitals, and they are the main innovators for this meeting. For this session, for this edition, let's say, we decided to show some cases of VT, but mainly we will show cases with pulse field technology because, as you all probably appreciate, this is real revolution in electrophysiology after so many years of using RF or cryo. Now we have technology which really is revolutionary in all aspects. And then we will also mention and show cases of left appendage closure. And we will also do 2 cases of cardio-neuroablation, which is also a strategy which takes over in last years, and you will see some cases. As you know, pulse field is really non-thermal energy, which is beautiful because it is tissue selective and you have a very low risk of collateral damage. But the problem is many people probably still don't understand that it's not like RF where you have only a few parameters you can change, but with pulse field you can change so many parameters that it's very difficult to optimize the pulse configuration, and that's why all these new technologies have to be tested not only in animal lab but also in a human, and you have to optimize them. And usually for AFib ablation you have to do remapping after 3 months regardless of complaints of the patient. So that's the only way how you can finally tune the pulse configuration to be optimal. And obviously this is the first system which we used, and it was mainly developed in Homolka Hospital, so they have credit to this because they did all this painstaking remapping after 3 months to really achieve almost 100% durability of lesions. And we use this system routinely. You can do a case in a half an hour or 40 minutes, including some difficult transeptal puncture. And here you see intracardiac echo, how you can optimize the position of the device in pulmonary veins. This is data from Czech registry. So you see over years, mainly because of use of pulse field in 2023, significant shortening of ablation time, which is very important because it allows you to do more cases. We also have, and we will show you this technology, which is also the technology which has been used remapping after 3 months. And again, both our centers were involved in developing of this system, Afera. It's a mapping and ablation system. And you can, in Atrium, you can basically reproduce MACE procedure. You can do any line. You can achieve a block. You can test that there is a block. So it's another interesting technology which we use today mainly for VT ablation. And we will see today cases with this technology. And this is example how the spectrum of technologies for VT ablation is increasing. This was a male with a post-MI scar, and we did the endo-epi ablation with a CARTO system and with RF. The patient had recurrence, so we did endocardial ablation with Afera, but still there was one arrhythmia which was, or 2 arrhythmias actually, which were unablatable from inside. So we asked surgeon to do a window, and we did epicardial ablation with a smart touch catheter and Centauri pulse field generators, so 3rd technology. And we were lucky that one of these arrhythmias was the critical substrate was epicardially on lateral wall, and we put the catheter inside this lateral branch of coronary sinus, and were able to get rid of all these arrhythmias. So you see the spectrum of technologies is increasing. I would also like to remind you that we did during this workshop in 18th edition, we did first worldwide live case of pulse field of neuroablation. Sorry, I'm so overwhelmed by pulse field that I put pulse field instead of CNA neuroablation. Sorry for that, but nevertheless, it was first case published openly, publicly, and we use since then extracardiac vagus nerve stimulation. So you will see it also here, and this is basically ultimate test to show that you achieved the denervation of the vagus. So a few words about Czech registry. I already introduced many times here. So we have probably the oldest registry worldwide since 2094. We have all data, and this was first presentation of this registry. Today we have 25 centers in Czech Republic, and last year we did more than 12,000 procedures, which was 18% increase against 23. And it was mainly because of using pulse field technology, namely FARAPulse. And this is data from Sierra Atlas, which will be published now. And you see that Czech Republic is, I think, 5th in Europe in number of ablations for AFib per million. But if you look for use of pulse field, this is Czech Republic here. So we do more than practically double of cases with pulse field. So if you want to see pulse field technology, you have to go to Czech Republic. And for this meeting, we selected a lot of new technologies. Some of them will be live. A few of them will be pre-recorded because it was not possible to do them in live. But I hope that you will enjoy and you will get some information what to do and which technology to choose maybe for your routine clinical practice. And few words of wisdom for the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for coming. So now we will review the cases done in last year in both centers. So the cases from ICAM will be presented by Nicoletta Ventrella, our fellow from Italy.
Should we say internationally ICAM or ICAM?
Internationally ICAM, we say
like
ICAM in Czech.
Homolka.
With Homolka, there is no problem with pronunciation, but maybe with our great scientist Purkinje. But we will talk later about that.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Nico.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. My name is Nicoletta Ventrella, and I am an EP fellow at ICAM, I would say. ICAM? Okay, ICAM. Today I have the pleasure to present you a brief overview of the cases performed last year and to update you about the current clinical conditions of the patients. So the first day started with an ablation of ischemic VT guided by Carto and ICE. The patient was a 73-year-old male with a history of acute myocardial infarction treated with multiple bypass, and he presented in 2023 with multiple ATPs and shocks from the device. And in the device there were recorded some episodes of VT with a cycle length between 300 and 335 milliseconds. The echo showed a markedly impaired ejection fraction and a kinetic inferior wall and also inferolateral wall. During the procedure, we performed a substrate map that basically confirmed the presence of an extensive scar in the inferior wall. Interesting points of late potentials and long SQRS were tagged. After that, during a programmed ventricular simulation, we were able to induce this tachycardia with the mid-apical exit from the inferior wall, but this wasn't sustained enough to be mapped. So during the rest of the procedure, two other similar VT morphologies occurred, but both of them were self-terminating. So the strategy basically included just substrate homogenization of the inferior wall. Right now, no events have been recorded by the device, and the patient is basically asymptomatic in class NIA 1 or 2. The second case was another ablation of ischemic VT guided by CT scan and then X mapping system. The patient was a 75-year-old male with ischemic cardiomyopathy and multiple PCIs. He presented with multiple therapies delivered by the device, and the echo again showed the akinetic inferior wall. Here we can see some 3D reconstruction of the left ventricle of the patient performed with the CT scan. And on the left side of the screen, we can appreciate a pretty nice correlation between the channels highlighted from the CT scan and the actual isthmus of the VT that was mapped very quickly during the procedure. On the right side of the screen, we can see a little bit the morphology of the VT with the inferoapical exit from the lateral wall, and also here the green tag. I don't know if you can see the pointer, no? But the green tag is the location. Yeah, it's okay. No, I'm moving it, but okay. Is the location where the VT was entrained, basically at the entrance of this critical isthmus. So during the procedure, multiple VTs exiting from the lateral wall, from the base to the apex occurred, and some interesting points were found in the region of the posteromedial papillary muscle. In particular, some mid-diastolic potentials were found at the base of it, and ablating in these locations, so we were able to achieve termination of multiple VTs. Also, a perfect pace map from the tip of the posteromedial papillary muscle was obtained. So basically, we decided to perform a more detailed map of this structure and also ablation all over the posteromedial papillary muscle guided by eyes, as you can see on the right side of the screen, in order to assess for catheter stability and good contact during the entire ablation. Also, this patient is doing pretty fine without any arrhythmic recurrences and is also asymptomatic. The next case was the ablation of ischemic VT with the Affera mapping system and the Sphere 9 catheter. He was a 71-year-old male with ischemic cardiomyopathy and multiple bypass. He presented with sustained monomorphic VT, and the echo showed an inferolateral scar. Also in this case, we performed a substrate map with the Sphere 9 catheter that confirmed the presence of a scar in the inferior wall and also inferolateral wall. Interesting points were tagged, and despite pretty aggressive programmed ventricular stimulation, we were only able to induce this non-sustained VT exiting from the mid-apical part of the inferior wall. So other VTs were induced during the procedure, but none of them was sustained. So the strategy involved the RF and PF substrate modification. Up to this January, the patient hasn't experienced any arrhythmia recurrence and is in class NIA 2. The next case was the ablation of an ischemic VT guided by EnSite X and eyes. This was a very interesting case of a young female patient that has been diagnosed with Kawasaki disease at 5 years old. She had a left coronary artery aneurysm that was treated with bypass. That was unfortunately complicated with anterior myocardial infarction, resolved with another venous bypass. In 2024, she presented with multiple episodes of non-sustained VTs, sustained VTs, and also VF. And the echo showed markedly reduced ejection fraction, as well as a kinetic distal third of the anterior wall and interventricular septum, and an apical aneurysm. At the moment of the procedure, the patient was on amiodarone and also beta blockers. So despite pretty aggressive programmed ventricular stimulations, no ventricular arrhythmias were inducible during the procedure. So we decided to perform some isochronal maps. And here we can see that during LV pacing, the latest activation point was located on the LV apex, while the RV pacing basically was able to reveal a concealed line of block located on the interventricular septum. Moreover, during the substrate map, some fragmentations on the left anterior fascicles were highlighted, and this segment of the conduction system was located in an area of scar, so it was considered to be a good ablation target. So during the procedure, basically we decided to ablate all these interesting points found before, and as well as pruning of pathological Purkinje fibers in correspondence of the left anterior fascicle. Unfortunately, the final EKG wasn't really accessible because during the procedure, mechanical left bundle branch block occurred. But the follow-up is pretty good. No events has been recorded by the device, and the patient is in class NIA 2. The next case was the pulse field ablation of persistent AF guided by eyes and performed with the Farapulse system. The patient was a 72-year-old male with some cardiovascular comorbidities. He suffered from heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, as well as persistent AF since 2022. He has a left atrial dilation, and he was on amiodarone because he was not responsive to propafenone. The EKG on admission showed sinus rhythm, but also some degree of interatrial delay, as we can see here with the longer P wave duration. So during the procedure, eyes evaluation of the pulmonary veins showed the presence of a common trunk on the left side. So we decided to switch from the Farapulse 31 to the 35 millimeters dimension. And during the first step of the procedure, we performed the PVI and posterior wall isolation. After this, we tried to induce some arrhythmia, and in fact, a micro-reentry activity from the anterior wall occurred. So we started to ablate the anterior wall, but during some applications in the anterior part of the right superior pulmonary vein, the arrhythmia changed to a typical atrial flutter. So we decided to conclude the ablation with a CTI ablation, during which the termination of the flutter occurred. Up to this May, the patient has experienced only one arrhythmic recurrence of atrial tachycardia, occurred in January, that was successfully treated with electrical cardioversion, but is off any antiarrhythmic drugs. The next case was the atrial tachycardia ablation with the Affera system. The patient was a 77-year-old male with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and apical obstruction. He also had persistent AFib already treated with 2 previous procedures, during which pulmonary vein isolation, posterior wall isolation, and also an attempt of mitral isthmus ablation were performed. This was the EKG on admission that showed dysarrhythmia or atrial flutter. So during the procedure, we started to perform a substrate map during the CS pacing that you can see here, and basically it revealed the presence of a channel located on the posterior wall. After this, we induced the arrhythmia, and we had confirmation that the clinical arrhythmia was a roof-dependent atypical flutter, as we can see here from the intracardiac electrograms, and also from the activation map on the left side of the screen. So we completed the posterior wall isolation and also tried to achieve mitral isthmus block. We tried from the endocardial aspect of the left atrium with RF and PF, but finally we needed to deliver some pulse field applications from the CS, as you can see here in yellow. And the final stage of the procedure included the CTI ablation. Right now, patient is only taking beta blockers, but he hasn't experienced any arrhythmia recurrences. The last day started with the pulse electric field ablation for inappropriate sinus tachycardia. The patient was a young female diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy related to a titin gene mutation. Ejection fraction was preserved, but despite this, she was implanted with ICD for primary prevention, and she received multiple inappropriate shocks from the device, especially during exercise or stress. At the moment of the procedure, the patient was on the highest tolerated dose of heart rate slowing medications, so she was taking metoprolol twice per day and also ivabradine. They were already titrated according to her blood pressure. So here, on the left side, we can see the sinus node that has been mapped during sinus rhythm, and also phrenic nerve in green points, green tags, that was tagged. On the right side, we see that during the isoprel administration, the exit of the sinus node shifted a little bit upwards and rightwards, and in red and dark red are displayed the lesions that we delivered. So during the procedure, a temporary phrenic nerve palsy occurred. It was an expected event, and he recovered spontaneously within the next hour after the procedure. Up to this February, the patient is doing fine. She hasn't experienced any inappropriate shocks, and ivabradine has been withdrawn, and also beta blocker dose has been reduced. The last case was cardioneuroablation in a young female patient. She hasn't any significant comorbidities, but she has a history of repeated syncopal episodes since childhood that were associated with paroxysmal AV blocks. She was not taking any medications at the moment of the procedure, and the procedure was guided by extracardiac vagal stimulation that was performed both with the fluoro guidance from the upper cervical location, but also with the ultrasound guidance from the mid cervical location. And here on the right side, we can see the longest AV block that we were able to induce during the procedure with the left stimulation from the upper side. The upper location. Here is displayed the final lesion set. We decided to ablate only the inferior paraseptal GP, having considered the clinical presentation of the patient from the right atrium, from the left atrium, and also from the coronary sinus. Also, this patient is asymptomatic, and she hasn't experienced any presyncopal or syncopal episodes up to this April. Thank you for the attention.
Overview from Homolka Hospital will be done by our Slovakian fellow, Branislav Chudiak, please. Pretty much on time, like 10 minutes, okay? No cases?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again, and it's my pleasure I can provide you with the cases we performed at Homolka Hospital. So the first case was PFA ablation for paroxysmal AF with omnipulse catheter in 67-year-old male with paroxysmal AF with no previous direct cardioversions, some comorbidities like hypertension, dyslipidemia, no left ventricle systolic dysfunction, and normal LAD. We use the omnipulse catheter, that's a large tip focal catheter that it's a single position catheter. You don't have to rotate it, and you can integrate it with cartoon mapping system. Here's the EKG at the day of the admission, and more details on the technology will be presented later during the sessions. Here you can see the integration during delivering the pulses in PVI. Each delivery was different from 12 to 16 seconds, and on the next picture or next loop recorded video, you can see the position and the image of the omnipulse catheter during the ablation. Next case was ablation for VT storm in dilated cardiomyopathy using the Affera system endoepicardial approach with Pericross device that was recently FDA approved in April this year, and using also the VA ECMO. It was the 56-year-old male with dilated cardiomyopathy with no chronic coronary artery disease, severe systolic dysfunction of the left ventricle around 15%, implanted by CRTD in 2018, and he suffered from VT storm in April 2024, terminated by 4 effective ATPs and 1 shock delivery. You can see the EKG with the running VTAC terminated by ATP, and downside you can see the non-sustained VTs that he suffered from. Just a quick brief how we get to the epicardium. We use the Pericross device, as I mentioned before, that allows you to retract the pericardial and introduce the needle and puncture the pericard more safely. Then you can introduce the wire and all the other catheters you need for ablation. Also, the details will be provided later during the sessions. Here you can see the electronic mapping. On the upper part, you see the epicardial mapping with no substrate, and downside you can see the endocardial map with 2 red dots that was marked as RF ablations points. Here's the activation map and more electronic mapping done by the Affera system. The procedure itself was really challenging. There was no electronic, no specific substrate in the epicardium or endocardium, since it was not ischemic cardiomyopathy. It was difficult to induct induction of any VT. Finally, we were able to map 2 tachycardias, one arising from the septal, the second one arising from the lateral wall. So we performed the RFA in septal localization, but on the lateral wall there was no critical isthmus. Moreover, the VTAC terminated itself, so we decided not to do any applications on the lateral wall. The post-procedural hospitalization was critically complicated due to combined shock, potential by catheter sepsis, prolonged weaning from inotropic and vasopressors, but we managed to do so, and subsequently we referred the patient here to ECAM for LVAD or heart transplant. Next case was again ablation for paroxysmal AF using the globe system by cardium in a 48-year-old obese male with paroxysmal AF. Again, short brief. The system globe, it's 30 millimeter catheter with 122 electrodes that can map, that can ablate and stimulate by the preference of the operator. Moreover, you can combine the RF with the PF as well. Here you can see the integration and how does it look in the left atrium. We did the PVI using the pulse field system and then combined PFA with RFA in ablation of the cava tricuspid isthmus. Here you can see that you can select the electrodes that you use to deliver the pulse field energy. Those shown in white are the electrodes that are not in contact with the tissue looking inside the pulmonary vein. The blue ones are the ones in contact with the tissue, so you can select these electrodes to deliver the pulse and therefore minimize the risk of hemolysis, for example. Here you can see the introduction, the globe catheter in the left atrium. On the right side, you can see the recording of the ice that the catheter is really good visible, and you can see the precise position, and you are able to manage the procedure really well. The next case was RFA ablation for recurrent PVCs in 73-year-old male who has been known with PVCs for more than 20 years at the day of the procedure. Firstly, he was oligosymptomatic, but later on, since 2023, the progression of weakness, hypotensive occurred, yet he was not able to take any antiarrhythmic drugs, and he underwent unsuccessful radiofrequency ablation in October 2023, not in Homolka. The localization of the PVCs were in the right aortic cusp and adjacent ventricle outflow tract in both ventricles. Here you can see that the focus of PVCs was in the LVOT or subaortically. The RFA we did resulted in significant reduction in number of PVCs, and but at the end of the procedure, the patient presented with post-contrast encephalopathy, but we were able to manage that conservatively. 6 months after the procedure, there were no significant number of PVCs recurrent, and still he was on no antiarrhythmic drugs. And the post-contrast encephalopathy required deep sedation, but afterwards he was all fine. Case number 5, it was RF ablation for paroxysmal atrial fibrillation using the QDOT catheter in 66-year-old male with symptomatic paroxysmal AF. We did only the RF PVI that took 23 minutes to do so, and afterwards we performed the electroanatomical mapping. 6 months after the procedure, there was no reoccurrence of the arrhythmia. Here you can see the lesions we did in PVs from the AP view and posterior view, and at the end of the procedure, you can see that the veins are completely isolated. And the last case was a case for persistent AF using Farapulse system combined with endoepicardial mapping system with the pericross device, as mentioned before. The patient was 55-year-old male with persistent AF and atypical atrial flutter, underwent direct cardioversion in 2029 and in 2022. No systolic dysfunction and normal left atrium diameter. On the left side, you see the introduction and pericardial punction, introduction of the guide wire. In the middle part, you see the ablation using Farapulse system with common protocol as you are used to. And on the right side, you see the ablation of the CTI and the catheter to map epicardially the lesions. Why we decided to do the epicardial mapping is that we want to demonstrate the transmurality of the lesion. As you can see on the left side, there are pulmonary veins before the isolation, and the right side is pulmonary veins with the posterior wall after the isolation. And on the right side, you see the endocardial mapping of the posterior wall and epicardial mapping after the procedure of the posterior wall. And as you can see, and I mentioned it before, we managed to deliver the transmural lesion. Thanks for coming and have a nice day.
We have few minutes we are a little bit ahead of time. So any question to these cases or comment?
Sure, if I can add, we decided because this PRAGUE system just got FDA during HRS. So as we have a lot of US guys here, so we decided to show you today. So in the beginning of the VT cases, so we will just jump to the Homoka to show live again, and then we'll continue the program, okay? Thanks.
So you can see that despite the fact that all cases were done in live, the results are pretty good in long term. And there were many interesting cases last year, but we focused more on VT. This year we focused more on AFib because that's the main workload for every lab today. And also the reason was that there are so many new technologies in development, so we would like to show you the spectrum of these new technologies. I hope you will enjoy. So, are you ready? We celebrated this year 80th anniversary from the end of Second World War. And Shiv will tell you sad story how science can be abused during wartime. So it's my pleasure to introduce our friend Shiv Kumar, and he will tell you this story.
Thank you so much, Yusuf and Peter. And this is it's such a joy. You know, I really look forward to this meeting every year. How do you guys?
I need to start again.
Sure, please. What you're going to be seeing here is a kind of a passion project which started in the year 2012 for me. And I'm going to tell you about how, when you start off a project, you guys can hear me, right, through the phone? Okay. So part of this whole story is when you start a project, all of us are busy. We are physician scientists. We're a very busy EP program, as you know. This story actually came out because of attending meetings like this, where you see world-class centers where they do complex ablations. And we were very, very passionate about anatomy. One of the talks in this session is going to come from a very dear friend. You're going to see Fermin Garcia. And all of us within EP realized the incredible value of anatomy. We ended up acquiring a very important collection called the McAlpine collection, and then we digitized that collection for the use of other centers in the world. And during that search, we came across a huge historical horror. And what I'm going to show you in the next 15-20 minutes is the story of how we did this. So at the outset, I would urge many of you, just, you see the QR code over there, grab that from the screen, and you can download the first 2 volumes of the Cardiac Atlas. So it's going to be there throughout the presentation, so don't worry. And I'm going to tell you the story of what the Amara Yat project is. So when you look through history of man, it's kind of interesting. Human beings have always been interested in a little bit of anatomy, biology. Of course, most artists only talk about external beauty, but people also depicted internal organs, and one of the earliest depictions of the human heart actually comes from the Olmec man. This is a little bit south of where I come from. This is in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's a very fascinating little piece. And another famous art piece that many of you may be interested in was done by another gentleman from Mexico. This is Diego Rivera's mural, which is, I would urge many of you, if you're going to Mexico City, to go to the Institute of Cardiology to see it. So in this mural, there are a lot of, the entire history of cardiology is painted, including a gentleman from this city. And the next talk is going to be talking about none other than the famous Dr. Purkinje, who, interestingly, his name was changed by the Germans, and it's correctly done so over here. You're going to say that, and I remember that story very well. And I'd urge all of you to please go look at the statue of Perkindy, because I always walk by the park every time I'm in Prague. It's a beautiful story, and it's a very inspiring story also about how a man, he actually did a lot for this country. So the story of arrhythmias itself starts long before we had ECGs. Wenckebach, the Wenckebach phenomenon we talk about, was actually described even before ECG was present. People were looking at venous waveforms and blood pressures to get the differences, right? So people were able to identify AV block. Now, a major advance in the field, of course, was electrocardiography. So once you actually had electrocardiography, we could actually relate mechanical events to electrical events. So it's a kind of a structure-function correlation. And of course, it's a topic for greater discussion that 100 years after Einthoven's Nobel Prize, ECG is becoming even more important in clinical practice. But one of the big mysteries in the field was, how did the impulse come from the atria to the ventricles, right? So you had the P wave, and then you had the QRS complex. But people really did not understand, how the hell did that impulse get from the atrium to the ventricle? This was a massive mystery about 100 years ago. People searched. They said, oh, some magic happens. There is a P wave, and somehow that drives the QRS complex. But that really required, a major contribution in the field. And that's why today we still talk about Tsunawa Tawara. And as a part of his sesquicentennial, we did a very special dissection of the human heart. And we did this 3D histology study. And if you look at this section over here, this actually shows the AV node, the penetrating portion of the bundle of His, and you can see the impulses coming in. And in this case, you can actually see the connection between the AV node, penetrating portion of the bundle of His, the left bundle that drapes around the left side of the septum, the right bundle which has a long course like this and subsequently activates the heart. So that was a major advance. And of course, X-rays, which was a Nobel Prize not for medicine but for physics, which now allowed you to actually see the heart and the beating heart. And look here, it's not that long ago in history that these things were there. So once you actually had a way of visualizing the heart and making, getting understanding of the structure of it, all it took was the next series of interventions. And probably one of the critical things for electrophysiology was this experiment again that was done initially in congenital heart disease, the panel shown on the left, which is the study that was done in France. And people were actually able to record a His signal. This is very important in history, that you can actually record an electrical signal that corresponded to what we knew in histology. So we had structure-function correlation. And now, if you look at these GIF images, these are pressure-perfused human hearts using the McAlpine method that was done in our research lab. And here you can actually see that that is the area of the heart that is being looked at. And if you look carefully over here, this is the membranous septum. That's where you'll see the exact point where my arrow is sitting here. That is the exact region where the His bundle pierces through the central fibrous body to get to the left side in a human heart. So, and you now know this, and of course, when you come to a meeting like this, you see how beautiful this is. Electrophysiology is the ultimate structure-function game. I still jokingly tell people, EP begins where interventional ends. So if you want to do electrophysiology, you better be really, really good in the interventional lab. And then if you want to use your brain, walk over to the EP lab, because you can do all these complex procedures and ultimately on top of it do science. Science also led us to something very interesting, and later today you're going to be hearing about this, and there's an entire session on cardioneural ablation. So we did, as you know, about 25 years ago, and again, it's time flies, Joseph. Now I think about it, we've been doing epicardial ablations for 25 years. We did complex epi-endo ablations. But sometimes when a patient's life is at risk and you cannot immediately transplant the heart, out of sheer desperation, we started doing cardiac sympathectomy. This, of course, opened the road for a completely new era of how we looked at neurocardiology, right? So now we can take all these disease conditions, treat them with neuromodulation. Now, once you actually start doing this, we realized we already had the McAlpine collection. You saw those beautiful heart images. We said, oh, now we need to really learn next level of anatomy. And so we went and searched through all the atlases in the world. And here is an example of a human heart. On the right panel, we actually have put contrast in the pericardium. These are what are called intact heart dissections, mediastinal dissections. They're very hard to do. But look at how delicate it is. These are the nerve fibers. This is the nerve plexus that comes in the posterior wall of the left atrium, which is why, of course, if you very aggressively ablate in the atrium, you can get things like gastroparesis, because these are the nerves that descend to the stomach and so forth. So anyway, this started a search for us and said, okay, let's search through the world literature. And then we found an anatomic atlas, which is an amazing atlas. This was called the gold standard of anatomy. And by the way, 2 days ago, I was in Vienna. This came from the University of Vienna. It was consulted by everyone around the world. It was described as unsurpassable and an indispensable atlas. And of course, I'll just put up this one image. You can look at it. You can marvel at how amazing this image is, right? I mean, look at how stunning this image is. This was done by a team at University of Vienna. Now, of course, 10 years ago, they became the Medical University of Vienna. But in those days, 100 years ago, it was University of Vienna. Unbelievably beautiful. And I thought, oh, great. Our search is done. And this was 9 volumes of the entire human body that was mapped. And this was done by an anatomist by the name Penkopf. Now, I didn't know this, and it's only after sort of digging up a little bit you realize that it had an extremely depressing history. The very first early days, as soon as Penkopf was made the rector of the university, he was the dean, and later he became the rector of this university. This was actually his lecture hall. This is not a political convention. This was the dean of the medical school at a lecture hall. And day before yesterday, I physically went and looked at that same lecture hall. It's still there. It was not bombed and destroyed in the Second World War. They've, of course, converted it. And every year in their history, they actually show this to their students. This was his inaugural lecture as a dean of a medical school. This is after the Anschluss. It was unbelievable, you know. And it turns out, if you looked at his Penkopf's atlases, they're amazing atlases, 9 volumes, but there were so many Nazi insignia. Their artists would actually sign, they would put swastikas, they would sign their names with the symbols which actually glorified, and they were not just Nazis, they were very proud Nazis. So this was a suppressed history. And there were multiple volumes of this book. All the way until 1989, they were published. And this was hidden. Nobody talked about this. The publishers were making money because the books were selling. And a lot of books that came after it became a derivative of Penkopf. And of course, for those of you who are more scholarly, you can go read this book by scholars who've done this. It's called Anatomy of Murder. What was even worse was, not only was he an avowed Nazi, he collaborated with the authorities of those days. They would actually time execution so that they could have a continuous supply of bodies. It was so disturbing, okay? So think of all of us, right? We are all doctors. We spend our entire life to help human beings. Many a times we are able to make people feel better. Occasionally we are very lucky to be able to actually save a life. These were murderers. They created a book and they ordered executions. And many of these people were put in prison because they protested against the government. It is unbelievable. You know, this bothered me a lot for me as a physician. And in 2012, I said, okay, I can't just sit quiet. If you look at even medical journals, this is shameful. Look at this. New England Journal, 1990 says, Penkopf is an outstanding book of great value to anatomists and surgeons. Nobody bothered to talk about history. However, other scholars started looking at the history and said, oh my God, now we have to confront it. What do we do with this, right? What do we do about the atlas? It's an unbelievable resource. It's actually very useful. Peripheral neurosurgeons, they actually use this, and its detail is unbelievably sophisticated. So there was a big dilemma. Some people said, okay, we have to acknowledge the history and just go on using it. That actually became a bit of a problem for me. Why should we choose? And if you talk to some of the people, and that's why I would say that it doesn't matter which part of the world you come from, we're all one humans, you know. When you look at how people have suffered, when you talk to people who have suffered, you realize, and here's a dear friend of mine who actually wrote a very beautiful piece. He says the Nazi origin of an anatomy text. And he said, and he writes it so beautifully, I believe it's a moral obligation to society and victims of survivors to repudiate the atlas. We cannot forget that Pernkov represented the abhorrent evil. We cannot forget that he desecrated the traditions of civilization. We cannot forget that Perloff violated the precepts of the Hippocratic Oath. Came from the same continent, you know, Greece, Hippocratic Oath. We cannot forget that Pernkov's character and action was so abhorrent as to irrevocably taint his work. We cannot forget that there's no acceptable rationalization to preserve this legacy in medical culture except as a symbol of what society should repudiate. I actually felt very inspired by this. I said, like, okay, if that is the case, one of my colleagues gifted me the entire 9 copies. I said, okay, you know, the way we look at it, and you know, Yusuf very beautifully cited Gandhi. My grandfather actually worked for Gandhi, and he was a freedom fighter, and he spent 8 years in prison before Indian independence because he edited a newspaper. These were people who have contributed so much for people, and I said we should also do good, but to do good is very hard. But we said we have to correct it. I said, why not? We should just do our own atlas. It's only after you go to the office and you look at how complex the atlas is, you realize it is a daunting task. But then we said we have to do something. So we created this project called the Amara Yad project. Amara in Sanskrit means eternal. Yad in the word Hebrew or any Semitic languages. In fact, all the languages from the Middle East, the Semitic languages, the term Yad means hand. So that's why if you go to Israel, the Holocaust memorial site is called Yad Vashem. So Yad is hand. So we created this project, and of course, the series of books, you know, so we decided first we'll start with the heart because that's an organ we all love, and hopefully today during the live cases, I'll show you images from this atlas. It's open access, by the way. Download this. This is free of cost. The entire world. There's no paywall. So, and it turns out that we are bringing out 7 volumes for the heart, and later we're going to map the entire human body, and it's very likely that we're going to actually have a big collaboration here with the team in Prague. I've been in discussions with many of your professors, especially with Dr. David Sedmera and his chair. So, but look at the power of what we can do. This is for cardioneural ablation. I'll show this image a little bit later today. Here is a dissection of a human cadaver showing you all the nerves that is descending from the higher centers. Now, I can tell you this, okay? This took us about almost 6 months to do this dissection. We can beat Pernkov. We can absolutely credibly beat them. It's hard work. It's on top of everything else we're doing. But look at this, okay? Spinal cord, dorsal root ganglia. Now we are also using the power of things like AI and imaging, but it requires the hard work. You actually have to go look at tissues to be able to do this. The future devices we're going to do is dorsal root ganglia stimulators. There's a whole variety of medtech. By Prague, the 35th year, you'll be seeing completely new devices that are going to come into the field. And I think we're going to do this together. This is one of the quick images from volume 2. Here is an actual image that we did. We did this as a part of the Amrayat project. This is Shimpe Mori, Rot Tongue, and by my colleagues who helped me edit this book. You can see this is the artery to the AV node. This is actually the physical AV node of the human heart. Isn't that beautiful? Have you ever seen an AV node? That is the AV node. And you can actually see these structures, and I would urge you to spend some time, and hopefully during these live cases with Dr. Kotzner and Dr. Newsel's permission, occasionally we'll pull up one image and show it to you, because there is so many treasures in this atlas. And the idea that you really have to understand three-dimensional conduction system, all these structures, and it doesn't matter, you start with the heart, all parts of the human body is so amazing. You know, we say beauty of form is not limited to the exterior, it's also interior. And when you look at it, the kind of information that you can provide now with the power of computers, artificial intelligence, and so forth, we're entering an exciting new era. So I would tell you that anatomy is never going to change. Physiology is better understanding based on structure. And this is where the field is going. And much like how Google Maps helped create driverless cars, we are doing a very interesting project. It's called the Computable Human Project. So we now take images. Now we are able to look at images of 200,000 CT scans. So we are creating completely new AI-powered atlases. And that's going to also be shared through the Amrayat project to the world. And in fact, this is the reason why we think we can map the entire human body in high resolution at various scales: macro scale, mesoscale, and microscale, and also ultrastructure. There is some science we're doing in our own area, which is electrical propagation in the myocardium. So this is just to give you a little flyby. What are you going to be seeing in the future? In the near future, you're going to be seeing stuff where, like here's an example. This is a little ice image. This is a clip, and by the way, this is spirit of full disclosure. This is IP that originated from UCLA, which went to a company called Anumana, which is now Boston Scientific is working on it. So you take a clip on the left over here, 20-second ice clip. The output is that. So it's happening here. So this is far better than any CT scan or MRI can give you. This is a live beating heart. 20 seconds of input of video on the left gives you the image on the right. This is an actual human patient done by us. So how does this happen? This is the power of computable, computational biology. This is real anatomy, real structure. What you see in blue is areas where the computer is more than 98% sure that it's seen structures. But look at the image on the left, right? Look at that. The areas that is red, it's 80 to 90% sure, and that is the descending aorta. So think of how amazing it is, right? If you were given this image on the left and you had to create the image on the right, you could probably spend 2 or 3 days and get some 80% close to that. But look at the sophistication of anatomy. That clip actually has all this content. So this is where we are going. I think in the future it's not just the heart, but other organs. This is the kind of data sets we're going to be getting. You may be putting up an ICE catheter up the inferior vena cava. Now, for liver interventions, in this case, this is the power of computational biology and how future of interventions are going to work. So my current interest, in addition to science, is now interventions of the entire human body. So I think the way you have to look at that is, and that's why every time I come to Prague, I'm very inspired by Dr. Katzna and what Dr. Neuzil have created. They've done as they've done gastric interventions. Their Institute of Experimental Medicine is just amazing. So I think our hope is, of course, like all centers, we want to combine, a future where I think the projects like Amrayat will help you take you from a new concept. Our own science, we call it Internet of the Human Body, but all of you are seeing that neuro interventions, organ-based interventions are going to be very, very different. And we've also been very fortunate to actually have international collaborators. Oxford University and the Indian Institute of Science, which is building a new hospital. It's called the Tata Indian Institute of Science Hospital. It's very similar to what you built in Prague. It's a hospital for MD, PhDs. It's an 800-bed hospital for physician scientists. So we think that we are looking for international partners, and we are in early stages of discussion to see if we could actually create a link with the team here. And I'll sort of leave you with a very interesting sentiment. You're in a historically old place, and I come from a very lucky part of the world, which is in the left side of the screen, and that is southern India. This is a temple. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Monument. Many of the temples there are 5,000, 6,000 years old, and they've been continuously active. We don't even think of it as an archaeological site because it's always been there. Whereas if you look in the right panel, you see that that's a Western Wall. That is just one small part of a temple that remains of a very ancient culture. So I think we really need to think we are one. I would say that you cannot see the rivers in the ocean. Every time I come to this place, I see year on year just to see all the great advances in EP were first tested in some critical way by your people here. So I'm a big fan of Prague EP. I'm very honored to have an opportunity to be a small part of your journey. And I'm looking forward to the continued success of this program. And please download the atlases. I'm looking forward to doing live cases. We'll be talking science. and I'll stop on time, which is always good. And I'll leave you with the last statement, and I'll say it in Sanskrit because you like it. It's called Dharmo Rakshati Rakshitaha, which means righteousness protects those who protect it. I think in medicine, all doctors, irrespective of which country, which political system, who cares who rules, we are one. And I think that's what is the joy of medicine. So, Joseph, Peter, thank you so much for this honor. And I think Vivek, if he's coming, he'll be there. I thank all of you, for this great opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for nice lecture, nice words.
It was outstanding.
You are a great part of our journey, not a
Great,
small part.
not small. Great.
My honor.
Okay.
My honor.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you.
I'll sit down. We'll discuss more. I'll be here throughout for the meeting. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions, but we will listen. I want to listen to the next talk.
Oh, yeah, well, good. Okay. So it's my pleasure and I'm honored to introduce my dear friend, Joseph Kautzner, Peppa Kautzner. Actually, we will continue with the socialized lectures. And his topic is to continue your story, okay? About one Czech man who is really good, not bad, very good. And his name is Jan Evangelista Purkyně. The only nation, like internationally, they are Japanese, they can pronounce correctly, Purkyně. And the problem, we discussed last time, because Shiv knows the story, because Purkyně spent his whole life, or scientific life, in Breslau, in Wrocław, in Polish Wrocław, but originally it was like Breslau, it was German university. And he was writing all these observations in German. And he was upset to hear from Germans his name, because they couldn't pronounce properly Purkyně, they said Purkyně, okay? Not Purkyně, Purkyně. So he was so genius to implement between N and E, J. So for Germans means, okay, fine, we can say Purkyně. Okay, Germans started to say Purkyně, but 19th century. But he didn't count. Then 20th century, the scientific literature will change from German to English. And now Americans came and say, Purkyně, what does it mean? It's a Parkinji. So actually, if he's alive, he would be even more upset, and he would thank the Germans to say Purkyně instead of Parkinji. Okay, Peppa, it's yours. Okay.
So thank you very much for this introduction of Purkyně. So I always joke that whenever I'm on meeting, I'm the only one who can pronounce correctly. But then I met Akihiko Nogami, and he told me, in Japan we always say Purkyně. So maybe more people can talk or can pronounce his name correctly. He was an interesting man, and I would like to just give you some brief biography and emphasize some of his inventions, which influenced medicine and biology quite a lot. He was born in Libochovice, which is close to Terezín. You may know from history Terezín, also sad history, which is not very far from Prague in the north direction. And he grew up in a estate manager family on this castle. So he got some good education, and he started Faculty of Philosophy and later Faculty of Medicine in Prague. And during his early years in medicine, he discovered the so-called Purkyně effect. I will talk later about that. And this study on vision was, it attracted the attention of J. Goethe, a famous poet. And he was instrumental to get Purkyně a position of professor of Medical University in Breslau, Wrocław today in Poland. So that was how Purkyně came to Wrocław. And he did studies on subjective eyesight. He made a career in Masonic Lodge. And then he married to his chief's daughter and continued a lot of studies in botanical, in microscopy. And then he had a very tough time because 2 daughters died of cholera and his wife also died. And he was left with 2 sons. And he founded the first physiological department in Breslau, in Wrocław. And that was really a very exceptional step. And by the way, we also translated poems from German to Czech and from Czech to Polish. So he was really a man of many traits. I have a question for you. Do you know who described the first time muscular sleeves on pulmonary veins? It was Ferdinandus Reuschel, who was a PhD student of Purkyně in Breslau. So this is a publication of this invention. They described muscular sleeves on thoracic veins, not only pulmonary veins, but also superior, inferior vena cava. So this was forgotten and reinvented by Michel Hassager when he published this seminal study on origin of foci that trigger atrial fibrillation. Then Purkyně moved to Prague, and that was still under Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he was fighting for Czech language, obviously. And he opened another physiological department in Prague. He founded Živa journal on natural sciences. This journal is still published today, so it has a very long history. He was also a member of Czech Parliament. He founded a Journal of Czech Physicians. They founded Czech Physician Association, and for all his achievements, he was finally promoted to the nobility. He received the Knight's Cross of the Order of Leopold, and shortly after he died in Prague. He influenced cardiac physiology not only by describing Purkyně fibers, but also he was one of the first who realized that heart sucks the blood during contraction. So it was one of his first physiological descriptions of this hemodynamics of the heart. And of course, you all know that he described Purkyně fibers. He played with lycopod spores to image sound waves, which was pretty inventional. He studied visual phenomena. He described this Purkyně effect. He described fingerprint structures, principles of ophthalmoscopy. He studied dizziness and posture and described Purkyně cerebral cells in cerebellum, which are very important for keeping our balance. He did some pharmacological studies and studies on hearing. So he was a pretty universal scientist and physiologist. So this is a description of Purkyně fibers in pigeon heart, and this is today's photo of this delicate structure, but you saw even better from Shiv. It was really amazing, this 3D reconstruction of conduction system, which is really nice. I came to Purkyně fibers personally close in 1998 when we had a young physician who suffered electrical storm after exchange of his ICD, He was survivor of cardiac arrest, and I saw this picture where you have very short coupled ectopic beats with a morphology which was similar to fascicular tachycardia. So we tried to map this without mapping system, obviously, because Carta was not yet available. And you can see on this historical picture, this is Purkinje potential during ectopy. So it was a source of this ectopy. And then we did ablation, and that was successful to abolish a very severe electrical storm. And then together with Michel Hasseguer and Akihiko and others, we published this paper which basically showed that Purkinje fibers can be trigger of ventricular fibrillation even in healthy persons. And later we came to this invention that it can be also after myocardial infarction, which is probably even more frequent than in idiopathic situation. Purkinje made his dissertation on physiological research of eye and skin and described fingerprints. And this was later perfected, the technique was later perfected by a Scottish physician, but you can call Purkinje father of dactyloscopy. I mentioned already Purkinje effect, and there is a difference between photopic seeing during day and scotopic seeing, where you have, as you know, in your eye you have rods and what is the name of the other cells? But principally, as the light intensity decreases, the red objects are perceived darker than blue objects because there is a shift from photopic to scotopic seeing. So that's called Purkinje effect. On left side, you have original depiction of Purkinje cerebellar cells. On the right side, there is a current depiction of these cells. So you see that it's a pretty perfect image of these cells. Purkinje did pharmacological experiments on himself because at that time there were no alkaloids, available like today in chemical pure form. So he took different plants, and he studied laxatives, and he studied emetine. So he was probably vomiting a lot during these studies. Could be very dangerous, but he was such an experimental personality. Additional discoveries, he described first animal cell nucleus and was one of those who formulated cellular theory. He studied a lot of chicken egg development. He studied plant organelles. He was involved in studies of physiology of speech, a lot of microscopic studies, describes ciliary movement, and also studied physiology of sleep. You may not know that he was playing with this device which is called kinesiscope, and it's still, I think, in a physiological department of Charles University, these instruments from Purkinje times. And with a rotational shutter, you can animate the movement of a horse, for instance. So basically, we can call Purkinje father of animated movie, because he invented this. And this is a facsimile of this journal, Jiva. And on the right side, there are some notes of Purkinje, what should be in the next issues of this journal, what kind of interesting observations. So this journal is still published until now, since 1853. And finally, as I mentioned already, he was a poet. He translated poems from German and Italian. So he was really a man of many trades. And Shiv already showed you this picture of a statue of Purkyně, which is in Karlovo náměstí, which is one of the biggest square in Prague, very close to Hospital of Charles University and anatomical department of Charles University. And this is a grave of Purkyně in a very important place here in Vyšehrad cemetery, which is called Slavín. And this is post-mortem mask of Purkyně, which is...
No, it's not post-mortem. He did alive.
He did alive. Okay, I was told that it's post-mortem.
Yeah, it's fine. It's like, okay,
But it's in...
detail. Okay.
But you agree that it's in physiological department?
Yeah, it's... We have animal lab there. Okay, fine.
So finally, just two characteristics of Purkyně. This is from, because he was persona non grata for Austrian authorities. This is from Ministry of Interior in Vienna. Dr. Purkyně, university professor in Prague, the leader of Czech separatists, incorrigible old man, a world-recognized scientific authority. Well, that was something like nothing important. And this is characteristics for medical historian, which I really like, and I believe that it really describes Purkyně personality. The more deeply I study Purkyně's personality over the years, the more I compare it to a large diamond, sparkling with a large number of small, well-cut facets. Each one shines sharply and perfectly, and sometimes dazzlingly. So I think that's a very nice characteristic. And finally, Purkyně has also one planetoid, which is numbered 3701, and that's just to emphasize his importance in science. So thank you very much for your attention.
Fantastic topic and lecture. Can I have a question for you?
Yeah?
Did you write any poems?
No?
Okay, fine. Are you leader of this of the structures? Okay, fine. This is very good. Okay, nice. Okay, so we have a third big guy in the program now. Fermin, where is Fermin? Oh, here. Fermin Gonzalez, another big part of the Prague ablation workshop. Okay, and the lecture is about the echocardiography. So why we need it? Fermin.
Thank you, Peter. I think this is like a few attempts to try to show you and convince you that echo, it's very important. I want to thank Joseph and Peter and all the for having hosted me here a few times and for this wonderful meeting in a city that's full of, as you already saw, history. And I'm charged with this question: why do we need intracardiac? And I'm going to use one word to get started, and that word is precision. And the definition of precision is the quality, condition, or fact of being exact and accurate. Now, the big question is, should eyes be in the armamentarium of an electrophysiologist? And let's think about this for a minute. If cardiac ablation is about precisely targeting an anatomical structure, then the answer is very easy, it's absolutely yes. Because in cardiac ablation, precision equals intracardiac echo. There's nothing else right now in the EP lab that can come close to this. And why is that? Because intracardiac echo is the only real-time, close-up imaging tool in the EP lab. There's nothing else. I'm not talking about the past or the future. I'm talking in 2025. What we have as EPs today that practice clinical EP. It's a high-resolution imaging of intracardiac structures because you're very close and surrounded by blood. And it will help us to precisely guide and visualize the anatomical structure and the catheter, and that catheter relative to that anatomical cardiac structure. By doing so, it improves accuracy and improves safety. You avoid clinical structures that you don't want to destroy, and you prevent excessive destruction of things you cannot destroy. It is a real-time monitoring of what you're doing. It can help you localize arrhythmia substrate by imaging. It reduces radiation exposure, which is, I think, critical. And after all, it increases the safety. And if you have a complication, which is very important because it's going to happen to all of us, you will be able to detect it and act on early before things get out of control. So in the process of doing this, I'm going to tell you how I got here to define eyes as something essential. And the first topic I want to show is precise anatomical definition. Now, as Chief mentioned, this starts after I finished EP fellowship, in which I started questioning myself that I could not understand anything that I was taught on fluoroscopy. People would say things, and I had to believe it. But then we started looking at this book. The first time I saw this book, it was given to me for 2 weeks. I kept it for 6 months in the office of Mark Josephson. One day he called me and he said, "Send it back to my office by tomorrow on FedEx." I had copied and I was afraid of giving it back because I had destroyed it. But this is how things in my mind work. This is a picture of McAlpine of the ventricle. Right atrium, left atrium, right atrium, left atrium. And this is the equivalent of this picture with intracardiac echo. You can see the detail of the tricuspid valve right here, the ventricular septum, the mitral valve, the space between the tricuspid and the mitral valve that allows the right atrium to be in contact with the left ventricle. You can even see the valve of Busen's right here and the beginning of the coronary sinus. So if you want to treat these patients and you want to be precise, I have no idea how we can see this with fluoroscopy. This is 3 different examples. This is a McAlpine picture of the SVC right atrial junction with the archway ridge. And this computer is frozen. I guess I'll have to start from the beginning. And how do I get the slides here? I was here. Okay. This is the SVC, and you can see this is a catheter placed at the archway ridge. This is that appendage. This is a right atrium, the SVC junction. It's perfect. And this is another beautiful one. And this is a recent thought of mine on how can I visualize better the LV summit. And I found this McAlpine picture, and it shows me this. And I said, okay, if I want to see these structures, where do I have to be? Where does my eyes need to be? Well, the PA seems to be the best place. Well, this is intracardiac echo in the pulmonary artery. This is the left atrial appendage, just like you have it here. You cannot see my pointer. Here, left atrial appendage, PA. This is the left ventricle. This is the top of the left ventricle, which is the same as this. This is the fat pad. This right here is the LAD. And this right here that collapses constantly is the anterior interventricular vein. And this is the epicardial surface of the LV summit. So this, to me, is anatomical precision. This is how you can translate McAlpine work into a living heart with technology we have today. I can only imagine if we get to what Chief showed in his last slide. And that being said, fluoroscopy was great, and this is just comparison of the best fluoroscopy technique, which is CT scan. This is a patient that came for a PVI, and this is the anatomy of this patient on intracardiac echo. You can clearly see this, and you can see the physiology of this. This is absolutely beautiful. And then we think further inside of what we're doing, and this is how I think EP should be. EP should start with anatomy, histology, understanding what we're doing, and physiology, and then we go to the EP lab to target anatomical structures. But then we think that everything is the same, right? A left pulmonary vein is the same on everyone, and right inferior pulmonary vein. These are 3 different patients, and you can see 3 different pulmonary veins. So it's like a fingerprint. Everybody's going to have a different anatomy. These are left pulmonary veins. Now, all this imaging takes it to the next level, because a lot of things you see on ice and presented, it's from the right atrium. So you're trying to look at the left atrium from the right atrium. This whole high definition thing, it's about having the ice probe in the chamber of interest. So now I can tell you that I'm inside of the left atrium. I have only blood to see 3 different pulmonary veins. They're all the same. Yeah, they're called right inferior pulmonary veins, but you cannot treat this pulmonary vein like this pulmonary vein or like this pulmonary vein. You can see the relationship with the posterior wall. So this posterior wall is completely different to this posterior wall. I had many examples until I came here today of radio frequency, how that made our procedures better. Obviously, if I show you this, it's obsolete. But I want to show this because I think PFA is amazing. I think for the few things that we have right now in the US, in my lab, it's very nice. But this is images of 3 patients with different pulmonary veins. Would you be able to treat this patient with the same tool that you're treating this patient? Because this is a flower configuration on a left inferior pulmonary vein. Looks beautiful on X-ray. But do you need this size catheter to ablate this small pulmonary vein, which is 50% ablating the mitral isthmus? This is not precise. There's no precision here. This is another example. This is the same example, sorry. This is perhaps where it should be. This is a left superior pulmonary vein. You can see the catheter is well seated. The flower configuration is beautiful, capturing this and this. This is a patient that we're ablating posterior wall. On fluoroscopy, this looked perfect, but half of the catheter is floating. You have to ask yourself if that's what's burning red blood cells. This is now the same catheter. You just adjust it, and you position it where you want to position it. And this is also a very nice position with a flat catheter on the roof of the pulmonary veins. These are all the same. This is a patient that you're ablating the inferior PV. This is not good enough. This is a patient that we're ablating the right superior PV. It turns out that it's perfect for the right inferior PV on this patient. And you can say it's the right inferior PV because the fan is cutting the right inferior PV. So these belong to each other, so there's no questioning. And then it happens sometimes that the vein is bigger than the tool. And you should size the tool appropriately for what you're doing and not just do it and not be in contact, because that's what causes success. We just published this on High Rhythm last month, and this was the same idea. Questioning ourselves, why do we failing on mitral isthmus ablation? And we came with this simple concept. You have the LV, the mitral valve, the pulmonary vein, and there's the tissue of the mitral isthmus. It has a variable length, a variable thickness, and a fat pad. where we have the great cardiac vein using it as our friend to ablate the epicardium. And then we now know the vein of Marshall goes from the great cardiac vein. This whole segment you can ablate with alcohol. You cannot ablate with alcohol the whole mitral isthmus because alcohol doesn't go to the proximal portion. So you need to understand what happens. Now, this is how we've been burning, if you had a good map, the mitral isthmus for years. You just have a map, you think it's all the same, and you just burn in this line. But what that line represents is a complex area. This is the line of this mitral isthmus. You can see the mitral valve, you can see the vein, the arteries behind, and all this to the left inferior pulmonary vein. So this is perhaps a better precision to understand this position of a bigger tool for ablation and to understand why you got coronary vasospasm. You're applying right on top of the circumflex. In some patients, it's subendocardial. In some patients, it's inside of the fat. So here you go. This is just alcohol in the mitral isthmus. Looks very nice. And this is just 3 examples to show you 3 patients with completely different mitral isthmuses. So on our mind, mitral isthmus is all the same. It's not, and this is why you have technical difficulties. In the ventricle, this was beautiful to understand that all those Purkinje triggers for ventricular fibrillation were associated with the Purkinje fibers associated with the moderator band. We would have never been able to see this if we only used fluoroscopy. And this goes on and on into the papillary muscles, similar. This is papillary muscle from inside of the left ventricle. You can see everything. And this is how a lesion looks and how conscious we need to be about what we're doing. Because this is not about destroying tissue. This is about precisely ablation. If you have to do 10 lesions in a pap muscle, you can destroy the mitral valve. So substrate is also useful. This is a patient that came with sudden death. This is a traditional intracardiac echo picture of the left ventricle from the right ventricle. But if I'm interested in the left ventricle, why not image on the left ventricle? This is the same patient. This is a papillary muscle, the papillary muscle, and you can see this appearance of echo-dense structure below the papillary muscle. You could not see this here. You could not see this by cardiac MRI. Maybe it's just because it's very subendocardial, and that was the source of the arrhythmia. And it comes to the basis of this. In ischemic cardiomyopathy, the scar is echo-dense, this known. And then what we combined to look at this was echogenic areas with wall motion abnormalities and thinning. This is your basic echo picture of a scar in a transthoracic echo. But as electrophysiologists, we needed to prove that this was where late potentials are. And then when you have these 3 things, or 4 things with voltage abnormalities, late activation, this is a scar for sure. This is a patient with seems to be an epicardial scar predominantly with ventricular tachycardia. And this is the eyes with the fan corresponding to this picture. So I can tell you that this white area corresponds to an epicardial area, which was critical for the VT and which had late potentials. We got here just by looking at eyes, and I can tell you where the scar is going to be. This is a more advanced case. All I want to show here is that you can also suspect when you have intramural scar, because the endo and the epi can be normal, you still can have VT, and you need to know where you're going to ablate. And that sometimes is inside of the heart, but you are ablating what seems to be normal tissue, but you really are targeting an intramural process going on in these patients. I want to show you avoiding collateral damage, and this has become very important for us, discovery of why we don't want to burn. This is a classic RVOT case. You need to be aware of the location of the LAD, and this is beautiful because you can see here the pulmonic valve and the LAD here. For those who like to burn above the pulmonic valve, you always have to think on this because you are very close to the left anterior descending. And we can see this perfectly with eyes. So for example, if you're going to burn from the pulmonic valve, you loop your catheter and you have your tip located exactly where you want it. And you're protecting the LAD. And you say, well, Fermin, why is that? Because if you follow the LAD on intracardiac echo, you can define the distance to the LAD and you can avoid problems. If you have a good distance, a centimeter or so, but if you have an LAD that looks like this, You have to be very careful if you're burning, particularly in the area of LV summit that you think it's RVOT and then you burn, burn, burn. You want to get to the other side. And of course, you think nothing can happen and you can occlude the LAD. And this is avoided by direct visualization while you're mapping. I love to see the left atrial appendage for every single AFib case. I don't do echo anymore. TE, because from the pulmonary artery, you have the most beautiful view of the left atrial appendage, and you can scan completely all the way to the tip. Because you can have things like this, that no problem, but you can have things like this. And this, of course, is something you don't want to deal with. So again, visualization of things. Most of the clots in the left side, I believe, come from the right side. And every time I do a transeptal, I look at my sheath before I push. This patient, I extracted this, and this is the clot from the sheath. You don't want to push this into the left atrium. And if you can prevent that, you will prevent embolism and strokes. Before we do a VT ablation, I look at the aorta, because if I have to do with this, maybe this is not a good patient for retrograde cannulation, and we should go transeptal. If you have an LV clot, that's a problem. And if you have one that's calcified, you might need to burn it, but just don't play with the clot. Just stay around it and be careful. So all these things give you the power to know what the patient has on the table. This is one of the most impressive things I think lately. We got this into Heart Rhythm. It's being published. This is a patient who had 3 prior ablations with RF for multiple flutters, posterior wall isolation. Everything is red. So we feel good about it, I guess. But I asked to map a recurrent slow flutter. And I put my eyes in the left atrium like any other case I do. And to my surprise, this is what I see. This endothelium is full with these small mobile clot things. If I were to put there a multipolar catheter to create a voltage map, what would have happened? I don't know because I didn't do it. And it happens to be that we mapped this flutter to remainder tissue on the epicardium because the endocardium was destroyed. So we started to stop thinking that everything is endocardial. There's a 3-dimension to all of this. And then finally, complications in the EP lab. You can have a patient that has cardiogenic shock. You need to resuscitate them after you induce VT, for example. A patient with an empty ventricle, it's usually, if it's not hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, it's bleeding. You have to find the source of the bleeding. That's why you cannot feel the patient is hypotensive. And of course, pericardial effusion, multiple views, but very early detection, you get ready to do a pericardiocentesis, nothing's going to happen. And a new one to me, because this is called intracardiac echo, this is a patient that we were doing an ablation, very complex puncture, adhesions, and then the patient at the end of the case becomes hypotensive. And I happened to look at the liver because I was worried about the liver. So you just come to the inferior vena cava and you can see blood, fluid around the liver capsule. We stopped the procedure and the patient has a small liver perforation and nothing happened. Everything was good. So this is a very powerful tool to detect complications. Now, this is a new version of intracardiac echo. It's called Crystal. It's by Siemens and Boston Scientific. And look at the detail of these pictures. This is what we're trying to ablate, guys. We're trying to ablate a bunch of intracardiac structures with the heart moving. We think that the carton map, it's beautiful, it's not moving, or the Navix, whatever we're using. But that's not what's happening. This is what's happening, and your catheter has to go into this crypt and this pap muscle. So my point in my final thought is that, as Sheath showed, this is just the beginning, but to me, EP needs to continue being of an anatomical guided precise procedure. And if you look at PubMed over the last 30 years, this is how many publications we have for intracardiac echo. This is not going away. I think they have to find a way how to incorporate it into your procedures because it's an essential tool for modern EP, for that modern EP who aims for precision, that aims for safety and efficacy during what seems to be an increasing complex procedures. Thank you very much. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Actually, can I have a question for you, Fermin? So speaking about eyes, how valuable is to add the 3D for EP intervention, 3D eyes? What do you think about, like, just guess, just like...
Yeah, I mean, I've used it a few cases. I didn't show that. With the present system, it's not as practical as doing this.
Yes.
They need a lot of tweaking for getting a decent picture. And one of the beauty about everything I show you today is that it's my hands doing this. It's your hands doing this. You don't need a third person in a machine trying to tweak things and making it nicer to look and doing programming. It slows down everything. There's problems with communication. This is our brain saying, okay, I want to move my catheter right or left. I'm going to move my eyes right or left. The problem with 3D is that you cannot do that from the bedside.
Okay.
So I think for EP, I don't see the application right now, but of course I could be wrong. I think for interventional cardiology, it's different. But for EP, I think what we want is more precise, nice pictures. And that last image I showed you, I think this is where we're going.
And you show us that you are very often in the left atrium when you want to visualize veins, right?
Yeah. My
You
concept,
recommend it as like general practice to go left side
every case.
because we have like big sheets, right? So
Yeah,
we can
it's
do
very
it.
easy to do. And I knew you were going to ask
Because?
this. So can I have one slide for a minute?
Okay.
This is how easy this is. This is a reconstruction. You have a wire from your third transeptal. You bring the tip down, and you advance into the left edge. This is not difficult at all. I can play it again. You know where you are. In this case, we have fun to sound. The tip goes in, and you have to follow your wire. The wire is there, and you just push in. You're in the left edge. So this is my workflow for every AFib, because I can see every single vein I want. I can see every ridge, every detail. Can see the mitral valve, can see the CS, can see the circumflex. You know exactly what you're doing. You can size the tool. It's too big or it's too small. Does it fit, doesn't fit? Try to ablate, but prevent extensive damage.
I think in many cases, the imaging from right atrium or from right ventricle maybe is enough, but I agree that often there is a difficult visualization of certain structures. But the most important is to use eyes, because I heard also from some physicians that eyes is the same 2D technique like angio, which I cannot agree with, because I did in my early career a lot of angios, but this is completely different, because with eyes you can get a third dimension, because you can rotate, you can go to different views, and you can get the third dimension even without cartosound. So that's really the beauty. And second beauty is that you can see it online, and you can replay it. You can basically see all the time live online image, which is not the case with angiography, because you do angiography and that's just one loop. And here you can image or display the structures all the time. So that's why we believe that intracardiac echo is really essential for advanced electrophysiology. And I still cannot understand why so many people try to blame cost and other reasons, for not to use intracardiac echo. Because if you believe, if you need that, you always can find a way how to use it. That's about believing, not about cost.
I mean, and one thing that you could argue is that there is a learning curve, but the learning curve is very short. It's like once you start seeing, it's like, it's like somebody turned on the lights. Now the learning curve is not long at all.
The beauty of learning in EP environment is that you have signals, you have your electroanatomical mapping system, and you can just add this, combine all this. So learning is much faster than if you have only X-ray, for instance. So for interventional cardiologists, it would be more difficult. But for EP people...
It's very important, your statement that we are independent, so you can operate yourself. You don't need to have anybody there, right? And so it's but I don't know pricing, Joseph. Always all these arguments are from Germany. And actually, I'm a little bit agree because the pricing, since like 20 years, we are using the 20 years, I mean more than that. So still the pricing is crazy, okay? But you are happy in the US because the reimbursement is full reimbursement, okay? I saw in Japan, and I mean, it was really something funny. They use always ice, maybe just for puncture, but they place the probe or catheter and nothing else, okay? They are not even using that. So they need to change the practice. Okay?
Not all people in Japan. I was there,
No,
and we trained some people, and they use echo. I know, but
Unfortunately for eyes, because that's how it started. When I was a fellow, the main reason to have eyes was to do a transeptal puncture, and then the catheter would sit in the IVC, and we're talking about just 20 years ago. But that never changed, and of course you can do a transectal puncture any way you want, and it's not that difficult. But this is just for the last 15 years or so. So I think,
So maybe in next 15 years things will change even in some other countries.
Any questions, guys? No comments?
So if not, we have lunch break. So thank you, Fermin, for a nice lecture, and we reconvene. Great. This is exactly what we need to